Hello everyone, welcome back to MLS Moves. Please make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Once we hit 5,000 subscribers, we'll be celebrating with a special jersey giveaway. 2 lucky subscribers will have the chance to win a jersey of their choosing. Whether you're a diehard fan or you're just joining the fun, this giveaway is our way of saying thank you for your support. So spread the word, hit that subscribe button, and let's reach our goal by the end of July. Now, back to the video. MLS has very complex roster rules and regulations that it's hard for the average fan to keep up with and really know what's going on. And there's a lack of transparency with the league. But me and Erik of the Voices of Black and Gold try to take a crack at explaining the rules as well as we possibly could, giving a little feedback on what we thought about each rule, and just trying to help the fans understand the intricacies of Major League Soccer. Erik, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Good, man. How are you doing, Will? It's great to be back on, man. It was a fun show last time. I'm looking forward to what we're about to get into today.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't think of someone else is into the weeds and like nerd out about MLS rules as I do. Obviously, they're hard to follow for a lot of people, even us and some executives. I mean, there's just so many hurdles and so many different verbiage. It's not easy to keep up with, but we're going to try our best to explain to the viewers about how the rules work, why they were implemented, and just try to hopefully ease the way to understand these a little better for certain people. Maybe some of them already the people understand. Obviously, the MLS fan base is very smart and well plugged in because you have to be an MLS sicko. So maybe this is just a refresher course for a lot of the listeners. But first of all, let's start off with the designated player.
Yeah.
The designated player is really what set this league up for success and kind of launched it forward into a new phase. And that was implemented in 2007 with the David Beckham rule, right? That was the first designated player that was ever signed. And that rule forever changed the league, Erik.
It did, and I think what we really have to go back is to the beginning. Why do salary caps exist? And number one, it's somewhat of a uniquely American mechanism for parity in sports. It's to kind of ensure that every team has an equal opportunity to win, and that teams can't just brute force by being in bigger markets and spending more money. And I think with this a lot and the salary caps when they started, you have to go back to the context of the American professional soccer landscape. And we go all the way back to the old NASL days and the New York Cosmos, and when Pele came into the league, which was the first. People talk about Messi today, but I think it's important to look at Pele. And part of like the development of what it did for American soccer. When Pele entered the league, the number of American kids that were in youth soccer organization was about 200,000. 2 years after Pele came in, that number went up to 2 million. So the growth of the game here from when Pele came in and really kind of showed it exploded the popularity. And this is back in the late 70s and kind of went into the early 80s and brought us to where we are now. Now, where I'm going with this, of course, the NASL collapsed. They had massive attendance. When he was there at their heyday, they were pulling 60, 70,000 fans per game. I mean, they were really blowing up, but it expanded so fast that, I think as there was kind of an economic downturn in the late 70s and the oil crisis, along with stagflation, a lot of disposable income kind of dried up and the league started to suffer. It pulled back and then ultimately collapsed, leaving us with a vacuum of a professional league. Enter 1996 when the MLS came. I believe that this muscle memory was firmly ingrained in everybody that, hey, it's possible to start a soccer league and have it fail and end up with nothing at the end. And so I believe the salary caps were put in place as a way to make sure that as this league expanded, it did so in a way that was manageable, reasonable, and it didn't overextend and then collapse because it expanded too quickly.
No, exactly, exactly, and I think that they had the safety rails or safeguards on this league to make sure, like you said, they didn't overextend themselves, they didn't spend too much, and then collapse and have the league dissolve, like the famous NASL, New York Cosmos, many famous clubs. They had a couple star players come back in the '70s and '80s to really excite people here in America and show that there was a passion for soccer. Now, one of the things about the designated player rule that I think, especially in today's soccer landscape, is crucial is that there is no limitations on what this spot can do. And every team, if you didn't know, has 3 designated player spots. Now, the designated player spot, you can spend whatever you want in salary on this player. You could spend, I think that the max salary you can have for an MLS player without buying them down with TAM or GAM is around 681K. Could be a little more or less, but that's about the general area it is. So this means that as a designated player, you can pay anyone over that salary. You can pay whatever you want, and you can pay whatever transfer fee you want for a player. Now, not every team does that. They're not going to spend 30, 40, 50 million dollars on a salary or a transfer fee. We know that Leo Messi is making a reported probably around 50 million a year, even though that the CBA numbers aren't really an accurate depiction of what he's making. It's closer to around 50 million. But without this rule, Erik, there is no Messi. There was no David Beckham, who was the first designated player. This allows teams to be able to spend what they want and how they want.
Yeah, of course. And I think with the designated player, we can kind of reduce this to the very basics. And sorry to all you MLS sickos that watch this, I'm not going to be saying anything that you all don't know. But to those of you who are a little newer to the league and haven't really studied how our salary cap system works, that's kind of what we're trying to put together here, is just lay the groundwork for kind of what it looks like. And, for this year to start, we always have the club salary budget, which this year is sitting at $5,470,000. So basically, every team is allowed to spend that much on the roster. But there are, as Will was saying with the designated player, they create basically a bunch of loopholes that teams can exploit to try to work off this. So a designated player, regardless of their salary, will carry a cap hit of $683,750. That goes against the $5,470,000. And try to slow down, not throw numbers out too quickly to get them all over the place. But essentially, Lionel Messi at $50 million, let's say, if the salary budget's $5 million and he's making 50, all of a sudden it makes no sense. So like when David Beckham came in, they said, okay, to bring in these star players that the cost of them is basically going to completely blow up the entire budget and you can't even field a team around them, we're going to create this exemption. And that's what they did. I think it started with just 1 or 2 designated players, and now it's up to a third. And the U22, which we'll get into, and all the mechanisms for basically, and the loopholes for buying down to keep clubs under the $5,470,000. So this is a great. Yep. Go ahead.
One thing I wanted to point out too, this is something that a lot of people, especially casual fans, get confused, is that, and especially since we're in the DP conversation, there is a difference between a young DP and a U22. They are not the same thing. A young DP is still a DP. They are only counting for, I want to say it was $150,000 against the salary cap. That's the difference. If you are a true designated player, that means you're not a young DP. Your salary budget charge is $683,750. And if you are a young DP, it's only $150,000 if you're 20 years or younger. And if you're 21 to 23, it's $200,000. So the reason why people use that, or they'll have a young DP instead of a U22, is all about the charge it counts against the salary cap. But the U22 is different than the young designated player. A U22, if I'm not mistaken, Erik, can only make a maximum of $600K annually. That's what their actual salary can be. But a young designated player can make, there is no limitation. It's just all about what the cap charge is on the salary cap.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, let's talk about why we have a young designated player and a U22. A lot of people, especially out there in the Twitter world, will see plenty of trolling on MLS calling it a retirement league. And there was a time when, of course, when David Beckham came in, that people would talk about that. It's a place where these old guys go when they can't play anymore, and we still get some of that. We have guys, and they're coming into the league every year that we're happy to see legends of the game come here. But as this league really started kicking off probably 7 or 8 years ago, they started looking at, we're getting to the point now where we can also develop young, exciting prospects and move them on to Europe. And so the young designated player is to incentivize teams going after young up-and-coming players who are still developing, rather than just chasing the sunsetting players from Europe. So the young designated player came along, and that's up to 24 years old, and with the lower cap hits. And again, this is to incentivize teams to bring in these guys. For LAFC, we brought in our Diego Rossi with that, and there's a lot of guys who they come up, and that's a way for them.
Ron Rodriguez.
Yep. The U22 program, this is almost taking it a step further, where they're trying to get guys even more raw so they can get them in and develop them. And so the U22 also has spots that open or close based on your third designated player spot. If you don't have a young designated player, if you carry 3 regular players, you only get 1 U22 spot. And so it kind of will put teams at a disadvantage. So it's really, to build a really competitive roster in MLS now, you really need to be filling all 3 U22 spots and a young designated player spots, along with your 2 aging veteran or solid designated player spots. And this is part of the roster build. If you're not utilizing all these tools, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, and one rule change that they made, Erik, recently, which is good, I believe, is that you used to, in order to use all 3 U22 spots, you had to either leave a designated player spot vacant. You either had to, the player could not be making more than $1.651 million. So essentially the max TAM, what the max a TAM player can make, which we'll get into TAM in a little bit. But they recently changed that rule now. You can have all 3 DPs as senior DPs, regular designated players, doesn't matter how you divvy them up, they can be whatever, and also use all 3 U22 spots, which is huge in my opinion, because that kind of just like, it's less safety guards, it's less regulation. It just kind of lets the team spend a little bit more. We know with your LAFC, there was a lot of times where they, like last summer, they couldn't fill that designated player spot with a certain DP, because then they would have had to get rid of their U22. So they had to essentially play last season without a true third DP. That's a good rule change. I actually like that.
Yeah. I mean, and in our case, look at that. We have a guy in the MVP consideration right now named Chicho Arango, and he was part of a fantastic LAFC season, the 2022 championship season. And basically they were in a position where they were forced to get rid of him because of the salary cap rules. And, this is something that happens with all teams that win. You look at Columbus right now that they're done with their CCC run, you see them starting. Aiden Morris is moving on. Like, they're going to start losing some of their key players that have contributed to this as well, because the roster spend simply can't keep up with the talent. And a lot of this comes down to value propositions. Like, it's not just what the player's making, it's how is that player performing for what they make on a salary. If you're getting serviceability out of a player that's making $200,000 a year, and they're putting up the same numbers as a player making $800,000 a year, or even if it's slightly less, you got to look at the 4 times salary cap spread between the two. And in this instance, you have a guy making less money but putting up really good stats for that as being a better value than a more expensive guy who's underperforming. And so I think a lot of championship teams basically have the sum of all total, more guys overperforming their contracts and less guys underperforming. And when you see teams that struggle, you're going to tend to have a lot of well-paid guys underperforming contracts, and it leads to a cascading effect.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point earlier about how in today's MLS you have to utilize all these positions. You have to use your DPs effectively. You have to essentially have U22s, or you're setting yourself up for failure or at a disadvantage. And there's a lot of teams who aren't using their U22s. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think Nashville is using a single U22 spot, which is absurd. And they also they don't use their national roster spots, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But I want to transition into TAM. TAM was another mechanism introduced to MLS in 2015. And the first one that I can remember it being used for was the LA Galaxy had three DPs. They had Robbie Keane, they had Omar Gonzalez, and then they had, I'm trying to remember who the third DP was. Um,
Was it still Donovan back then? Or
no, Donovan retired after the 2014 season. But
Ju-
they, I'm trying.
Juninho?
No, it wasn't Janino. I'm having a lapse of memory here, but Omar Gonzalez, Robbie Keane, and there was a third DP, and they had to buy Omar Gonzalez down, and that was the first player I remember significant that they used it on the TAM, so that way they could. Oh, it was Steven Gerrard. That's who it was. Steven Gerrard, because he
Ah,
came in. So Steven Gerrard. So it's Steven Gerrard, Omar Gonzalez, and Robbie Keane as their three DPs. They had to use the TAM to buy Omar Gonzalez down so that they could sign Giovanni Dos Santos. That was kind of like the reason they made the rule, is so that they could have this kind of awkward player that's not necessarily DP worthy, Eric, but like better than average player. They wanted to kind of like balance out the middle of the roster. And that's exactly why TAM was introduced, to balance out the middle of the roster, to bring more quality in the middle of the roster, and hopefully bring more depth to the league. And I would say overall, if you look at 2015 to now, that's exactly what it's done, even if it's slower than most people would want. That's exactly what TAM has done, and that's what it was created to do.
yeah, I think so. And then it also got delineated to TAM and GAM, general allocation money and targeted allocation money. But I do think that it it really, for I think like kind of numbers nerds like us, it really gives the general managers and the front offices more tools to really kind of play around with how they construct a roster, and really kind of progressing. As with any rules that come in, people need to push it as far as they can go, because I mean, these are competitions. If you want a competitive advantage, just like when we see the players in the field, it's total war. You have to take every rule you have and you have to push it almost to the breaking point. And that's what we see a lot with the GAM and the TAM. Important, I think, distinctions between the two. The general allocation money is assigned every year to the clubs. In 2024, it was 2,585,000. And then the TAM, the targeted allocation money, it's a little less. I think this year, I don't have it in front of me, it was around $2.1 million that they
Yeah,
assigned.
I'm gonna add this for us that way we can visualize this right here. We're gonna get more into this, but this is a chart. The top one is the CBA the MLS signed before COVID. The bottom one is the revised CBA after COVID. They had to make some revisions to it because of spending, and obviously they were hurting financially. Understandable. But the top one is the original CBA for comparison, and the bottom one is the new and current CBA. And Eric, like you were saying, you can see that discretionary TAM, which is regular TAM, you can just see how
Is declining.
that's being phased out, while general allocation money is starting. They are starting to increase that, and it's because the TAM, Eric, is very limited what you can do. There's only a certain type of player you can use on. Whereas general allocation money, you can spend it however you want. You can buy down. You can use it towards a transfer fee. It's way more versatile than TAM.
It is, but the thing that TAM does that GAM doesn't do is the TAM can roll over year to year. And I think really this is one of the main tools for how championship teams build their rosters. The other thing also, discretionary TAM can be traded. General allocation money cannot. So, and when we were talking earlier on, we have our 5 million $100,000 general budget. So this money can be used, the GAM and the TAM can be used to basically subtract players' salaries to bring them under that 5 million. And as Will mentioned before, the way it came in and the way it's used is it's really critical, I think, to how things get done. It allows you to bring in guys in the middle of the roster. any player over around $680,000 has to be bought down one way or another by some money, because that's like the max charge, which is the same amount as the designated player charge is. So all of that going, these are kind of the funny monies. And as you said, the general allocation money is getting ramped up. The discretionary TAM, they're trying to kind of do away with it. Although I do think that completely getting rid of it will be a little bit more trouble than it's worth, just because the way that teams do use the discretionary TAM. And I think it would really interrupt a lot of strategy with championship rosters. Like, again, the TAM being able to roll it over right now, LAFC is a great example because I know it. I think if we had made the CCC, we would have kept Carlos Vela. We would have been forced to compete in this competition. And then we would have been spending discretionary TAM to fit him on the roster. And since we haven't, we're kind of in a rebuilding mode since our 2022. Keeping him off there allows us to keep this discretionary TAM and roll it over. So if we really want to push for the cup later in the season or next season, our pile of TAM is going to be much bigger to start with, and allowing us more options and flexibility for our roster build.
Yeah, and I think also too, it'll be interesting to see if they phase this out. How are they going to keep those certain players? I don't know. It's going to be. I guess it does give more freedom, like we said. If the max salary budget is $680K, the max TAM amount you can make is 1.68 million. So it's essentially adds $1 million to that range. So people between 680 to 1.6 million dollars can. You can use TAM on. Now, another thing that's important, Eric, and this is one thing that your club has used very effectively, and they've changed the rules on this. When you sell a player, you can allocate a certain amount of their transfer fee to general allocation money. I think they changed it now to where it's $1 million, maybe a little more than that. It was like $750K. But one of the things that LAFC has done so effectively is that they turn players in and out. They'll buy a player, sell a player, rebuy a player, have more money at their disposal to bring in more players. People always ask, how does LAFC accumulate all this talent? How are they doing this under the rules? It's because they're selling their players. They're getting more GAM than the average team has, and they're just reinvesting it into the club. And they do this so effectively and probably better than any other team in the league.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. We've definitely had our flops, but the sweet spot that I think John Thorrington specifically has hit is with transfers that are in kind of the low seven figures, like, the guy Timothy Tillman, which is even below that. I mean, he is a guy that he costs $450,000 in a transfer fee, and what they could sell him for in transfer now, I think probably has to be double or triple that at least. And if they decided they wanted to trade him within the league, the amount of general allocation money coming back in would probably be close to a record. I mean, I'd imagine they probably could get more than they got for Kellen Acosta, which was, almost $1.5 million in GAM. And, we also look at Kwadwo Opoku. He's another guy we've moved for a bunch of GAM. Walker Zimmerman, of course, is another one. But yeah, all this money comes back in. It gets reinvested for players. And, general allocation money does have to get spent every year, but it also frees up some discretionary TAM that can be used for later on, which I think is really how we've been utilizing this.
Yeah, and they do it better. They do it better than any other team in the league, and that's why they've consistently. It's why they went to 2 MLS Cups in a row. They won one in 22, and they were the runner-up in 2023. Now this is one rule that I want to bring up, Eric, that's a little tricky, a little confusing to the average soccer fan. And that's
we're not confusing yet.
This one is just a little crazy because of what the name of it is, right? Maybe the name isn't totally, I guess accurate for what it is, but it's the discovery rights rule. It allows a club to essentially, I call it the dibs rule, right? It's not the discovery rights, it's dibs. It's like you claim the right to sign a player. You didn't discover them. Nobody in MLS discovered Leo Messi. Nobody discovered Marco Reus. Nobody discovered Olivier Giroud. These are known commodities, right? Yeah. But that is what the name, it's a terrible name for what it actually is, but it's called the discovery rights. And there's a player right now being rumored to come to MLS and Weston McKennie. and his academy team was the FC Dallas,
Yep.
and they reportedly have the discovery rights for him. So in order for Cincinnati to be able to sign him, they have to work a trade out with FC Dallas. FC Dallas, obviously gets the right to first refusal to sign him. I don't think he wants to go back to Dallas. They can't afford him, but in order to sign him, they have to work this out with Dallas. They have to trade something. Normally it's GAM, maybe sometimes it's TAM, but that is another rule that is kind of wonky in MLS, right? Discovery rights.
Yeah, this, as much as I love the rules, this is probably, I think, the most bizarre of them all. And, I, I have no idea how that came about. My only speculation is whoever advocated this either has a really sick and twisted sense of humor, or I think more realistically, this was an idea, and I'm just speculating here. I really don't know anything about this, but it seems to me logically that this is something that could have been floated by the teams that don't like to spend money as much. And it's just kind of a weird way to kind of dink teams out of making them pay a $500,000 here and there just because, they threw a dart at a board on a top 100 world player, and that player happens to be one of the ones that their dart landed on. It's like, yeah. What was I wish I'd say, but Charlotte had, was it Charlotte had Giroud?
There's Marco Royce and LA Galaxy are
That's right, Marco
yeah.
Royce. Charlotte had Marco Royce, and I think they're trying to get a crazy number for him. But how did Charlotte end up having discovery rights on Marco Royce? Like, it just basically had to be somebody looking at a board and saying, okay, who does it somebody not have that might go? And it's almost like a weird lottery system of if you happen to pick a guy that somebody wants and you have that one, then they have to pay you. So
100%.
Yeah, it's the stupidest rule, and it makes no sense. And like I said, I would love to know the story of how this rule became made, because I bet you the story has to be hilarious.
Probably price gouge cheap, ambitious teams, right? Like you said, Colorado says, "Hey, I discovered Cristiano Ronaldo. LAFC, if you want him, come. You're going to need to pay $250,000 in GAM to come get him, right?" And they don't have to sell it, right? They don't have to technically sell the discovery rights. I don't remember what the record was, but there was one discovery rights trade that was actually pretty crazy, like how much a team was willing to spend on a player. But look, this is nonsense, right? It really is. It doesn't need to be this way. If a player wants to come over to MLS, I'm pretty sure they have Olivier Giroud probably wasn't going anywhere except for LAFC, right?
Yeah.
And it would be silly for a team to hold LAFC hostage for a player that they have no realistic chance of signing just to be petty.
Of course. And I also wonder, because it's not really laid out, what would happen in that scenario where a team just flat out refuses to sell, let's say Griezmann, who's heavily rumored to be coming, fingers crossed to LAFC also. What happens if, the Galaxy hold his discovery rights, for example, right? And they're like, oh, yeah, you want us to give it to you? Yeah, you fat chance on that, buddy. I wonder what mechanisms Don Garber has in the MLS office to override this. It's not really clear, but I couldn't see a scenario like that happening and then a player not coming here because the team just refused to give the discovery rights to especially a guy that's going to be a moneymaker here like that.
It's bad for the league, man. It's bad for the league. Okay, one more rule that is very important that we haven't talked about, and then we're going to delve into this list that we have, this chart we have in front of us that kind of talks about what the league was supposed to be and where it's at right now, is the homegrown player rule, right? This was a rule implemented so that teams could sign their youth academy players on the first team with no, if I'm not mistaken, there's no budget charge against a homegrown player. It's completely, it's 100% off the cap, and you can sign as many as you want. So theoretically, you could have a team full of homegrown players and not have a single charge against the cap, which would be pretty crazy. But that is a good initiative to help promote youth development. It helps teams out with their financial decisions because they're not saying, "Oh, Erik, I can't sign this guy because I'm going to be over the cap if I sign him." You could, and they can make a pretty decent amount too. I think I want to say one of the higher paid homegrown players that I remember was like Jossie Zardes back in the day with LA Galaxy. He was making like 300,000 or 400,000 a year, but that was back almost a decade ago, which is crazy. That was very good money for Major League Soccer at the time. I'm not really sure like what the going rate is for the homegrown salaries this day, or in today's MLS, specifically because there's so many homegrown players. But this is a good mechanism to help teams financially, where they don't have to worry about the cap and they can get these youth players on the first team roster.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess another kind of side rabbit hole on this is roster slots. And one thing is with the team and all of these rules here is there's 20 senior team roster slots that teams have now, and then there's the supplemental slots, which are slots 21 through 30, and these are your homegrown players, along with aside from homegrown, they don't necessarily need to be from the academy, but maybe you grab a guy on the college super draft, or maybe you find a kid at the Monteverde Academy in Florida, which is where we got Mamadou Fall and some other players, basically like academies that develop players around the world who don't have other opportunities, that are 16, 17, 18, they kind of go to their high schooling and then they come out and they're still kind of prospects. So they get lumped into this too as zero cap hits. For us, guys like Tristan Blackman, he was a zero cap hit. Danny Musovsky, zero cap hit. If you look, and this is one thing I think for the Philadelphia Union fans, where I think if I was a fan of that, I would have some frustration because their academy absolutely pumps talent. Dallas is another one that pumps talent.
Red Bulls.
They could have Ricardo Pepi playing there right now as a starter on a zero cap hit as a homegrown. Brendan Aronson could be playing for the Philadelphia Union as a zero cap hit, along with his brother Paxton Aronson. Imagine having two guys that are, Brendan Aronson is a DP level player, I would say, if he was here. Paxton is a high GAM, very close to a DP. I mean, imagine if Philadelphia went and got 3 full DP players along with 2 homegrowns that are basically DP players. Then they're U22s. They would basically have 8 guys on that roster that were all at a DP level, and they would probably run roughshod over the league. Meanwhile, basically, they're one of the lowest spending teams. But just to kind of put it into perspective, like, how important it is to have good homegrowns in your system. This is another thing that will bust. It'll bust the rules, and it's designed for that. Part of MLS is developing American talent. So incentivizing teams to develop and play American talent, it puts them into a position where all of a sudden one of their starters carries a zero cap hit. This is money to spread around at the other 10 positions, and it will give you a structural advantage. But in the case of what we have, the big academy teams, I think, which is really Dallas and the Philly Union, I think, are far and away the most successful academies. They kind of have just turned into like selling clubs more than they've really concerned themselves with winning the league. So, if we ever get a team that builds an academy like that and decides they want to keep their players to just dominate this league, it's going to be a very interesting thing to see. And I think as fans, and with the understanding now of what the salary rules are, you can see what an advantage it would be.
Yeah, I hear you perfectly. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, so I'm gonna have to record without a headset for a little bit, or a camera. But the last thing that we had said, if I'm not mistaken, we were talking about the homegrown player rule.
We were. I don't know where it got cut off, but
well, essentially, we were just talking about how important it is because the league's able to utilize a rule with no salary cap limitations. No, they can use it on as many players as they want. That's through the youth system.
right.
But the last thing that I was really wanting to get to is the international roster spots. And like I said, guys, I apologize. Another computer technical difficulty. Hopefully this time it's not as severe. But the international roster spots, Erik, you're allowed to sign up to 8 international players on a team. Now, obviously, they can get their green card and they don't account for an international roster spot after that. And that's been several players in the league and teams have utilized that rule. Now, some teams don't use their international roster spots at all, or very rarely. Like Nashville SC, I think only have like 3 actual international players on their team right now, which they also don't use their U22s, which is a very ineffective way to win in this league. And you can also trade for international roster spots, which is another wacky rule. But I'd like to see that rule expand in the future. But hey, if you get your green card, you can technically, it's a loophole for more international roster spots.
No, 100%. And I think in a big way that the international roster slots again is a way. Part of MLS is to encourage development of the game with Americans. But they do work very closely with U.S. Soccer, and I think there is a interest in everybody here for the United States to develop players better. And a domestic league is, I would say, is the most effective way of developing local players, whether it's MLS or whether it's USL. It's like these are all pathways for people to play the game professionally. And so I do think the international rules is a little interesting because, as you said, some teams do wheel and deal it. If we look at Nashville and other teams that really underutilize these, we also see that these teams aren't very competitive, other than sometimes
100%.
it's tournaments. But yeah, I mean, Nashville in its heyday when they had Mukhtar, who I think, he's still there, but he's a green card, so he is no longer an international. But, that was about the extent of it. And it just comes down to how teams are. I do think, roster builds are very different, and every team's ownership has different amounts of money that they're willing to spend. And, some are trying to play a money ball, which Philadelphia, I think, is probably one of the best Moneyball teams that there is, and they rely on their academy to do that. And, another way of it, I think, St. Louis, I think, is almost doing a little bit of a Moneyball as well, as which they've spent a lot of their money on defensive players, which is something Nashville did too when they first started. I thought, it's kind of smart, get a DP center back, which is rare. Or in the case of St. Louis, get a DP goaltender. These aren't usual DP slots. And I know meandering from the international focus, but you're bringing players in from overseas generally to really build up your team. And making a player domestic when they get to a green card, I think is really a smart thing to do, because at that point, they're pretty established. They're a league journeyman at that point, whether it was Carlos Vela for us, and whether it was, Diego Rossi in Columbus or, Hani Mukhtar in Nashville. I think getting guys here, and it's basically just a green card. The green card process takes about 2 years or so. So any player
100%.
coming in, if they're going to be here over 2 years, the green card should be something they get. Emmanuel Reynoso, I think, is one who was here and didn't, and we all saw the kind of drama that guy
had. Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. Well, Erik, listen, this has been a fun episode, man. I hope the people, I'm sorry again for the difficulties. I hope the people enjoyed it as much as we did discussing it, obviously nerding out on some MLS soccer rules. Now, you and I are also going to be doing another episode in the near future, kind of talking about what we would change, almost having a debate on where you think the league is, where I think the league is, and where it needs to go. So I'm looking forward to that. Can you tell everybody where they can follow you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me Erik VOBG, which is for the Voices of Black and Gold podcast with my co-hosts Nick and Salso. We're there every Monday at 7 p.m. Doing a live show on about LAFC, our favorite club in the league, and it's. You love the league, you kind of love all the teams as well. So we do cover a little bit of everything, but typically, we're big LAFC homers, unapologetically.
Yeah, so make sure you guys give the Voices of Black and Gold a subscription, a follow on Twitter. Very fun channel to watch, and good takes on Twitter as well. But hey, until next time, Erik, I'll see you all soon.
Thanks.